Pencil Kings, Pencil Kings, Pencil Kings, Pencil Kings, Pencil Kings, Pencil Kings. This program is about making art accessible, and I'm not talking about playful stuff. I'm talking about serious art, available to anybody with the desire to be able to make it. The program is built for that purpose.
It's Wednesday, so it's time for the Pencil Kings podcast. And today we're talking with Kevin Murphy. I was introduced to Kevin from Dorian, a previous podcast guest, where if you remember, Dorian encouraged people to burn the boats. And I've been thinking about that, and I think it's really actually great advice. I've done it a few times. Dorian put me in touch with Kevin because Kevin, as well as being a very accomplished artist, has started building these art schools for the past few years. And the results are just amazing. I've been talking with Kevin a little bit before we hit record here, and I'm just blown away with everything that I'm learning. I think that this episode, you're going to learn a ton, especially if you're thinking about going into some formal education program, what you should be considering. So welcome to the call, Kevin. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us because I know this is going to be an amazing interview.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So to start off, as we always do, why don't you give people just a 1-minute overview of who you are, and then we'll just dive into this discussion. It's amazing.
Well, actually, it's going to take more than a minute because I want to give a little bit of background.
Yeah.
Because I come from a place that anybody who says they have challenges as far as becoming an artist, my story about how I got to where I am, I think would inspire them and give them the encouragement to see it through. I was born and raised in the Bronx, very, very tough neighborhood in New York City. And where I grew up, there were no art programs. Even within the schools, the art programs were laughable. In high school, they were working with crayons and pencils, and that was pretty much the extent of the program. And so I graduated high school. I just barely graduated. I skirted by about 0.1 above what I needed to be a passing grade. In the U.S., the passing grade is 65. I was a 65.3, I think, when I graduated. Just barely got by. I was in trouble all the time. And I didn't really have any prospects. I wasn't interested in art, and I was borderline illiterate at the time. I could barely read. The school system, in part its own fault, but in part my doing, failed to educate me. And so when I graduated high school, I had a friend that was in the carpenters union, and I became a union carpenter, and I worked in skyscrapers in the city doing construction for about 3 years. So when I was going down to the city each day to work, I would sit on the train and stare at all the homeless people at 6 o'clock in the morning. And after a couple of weeks of that, I got tired, and I asked a friend of mine if he would recommend a really good book. I said it was the only thing I could do because there was no technology back then. There were no iPads or anything like that. And so I slowly started reading just because I was bored. And it took me a while to get my feet under me and start to pick up speed. But I eventually took a class on speed reading. And by the time I actually stopped working construction, I'd read about 1,000 titles, about 1,000 books cover to cover. Yeah, and so it was just out of boredom, and it was killing me that it took me, 3 weeks to read a 190-page book. And so I took a course on speed reading, and I applied it. But anyway, the books that I was reading, at least at the beginning, were all science fiction and fantasy books. I was very interested in the subject, and I loved the covers. And so about 3 years into my construction career, I decided I wasn't going to do it anymore. I was 21 years old at the time, and I didn't like the early mornings or the cold winters. And so I decided that I was going to become a book cover illustrator. I wanted to do science fiction and fantasy book covers. I had really fallen in love with the genre, and I really loved the work. I didn't know what was involved in building a career, but it's funny, you talk about Dorian saying burning the boats. I don't believe in a plan B. I believe that if you have a plan B, it's where you wind up. So I went into work one morning. I gave all of my tools to one of the apprentices that was there, and I packed it and went home. I stopped at the School of Visual Arts on my way back from the construction site. I picked up an application, and for those people who are not familiar with the School of Visual Arts, at the time it was the #1 school in the world for illustration. So I got an application and somehow got into the school. And what it wasn't my grades, clearly. And I would even say, looking back at the work I was producing at the time, my portfolio should not have been able to get me into a school of that caliber either. And I assert that these schools, they make so much money by filling the seats. They'll take anybody. If there's an open seat and you're willing to pay the bill, they'll take you. And so I wound up at the School of Visual Arts as a freshman student at 21 years old. I went there for one semester, and I think the bill was $9,000. My education for $9,000 was that I was never going to receive the education I needed to become a working professional in that place. And I got out. I spent the next 6 or 8 months painting on my own. And I worked 15, 16 hours a day. It's all I did. And my work progressed, but I just couldn't seem to clear certain hurdles. I was a big fan of Boris Vallejo, Dorian's father. And I tracked him down, and I reached out to him, and I asked him if I could come out and watch him work. I'd seen an article in a magazine a few years earlier that said that he allowed people to come and watch him work, but he wasn't doing that any longer. I then sent a letter to Dorian, he was actually still in school at the time, but he was a working pro already. And I asked Dorian if I could come out and watch him work. Dorian was generous enough to let me come out and watch him work. I went out to Dorian's place 3 times, overstayed my welcome terribly. Well, actually, I went out, I met Dorian, and actually this is a bit of a funny story, and I know this is going to drag on a little bit, but
I'm loving it.
It's definitely worth doing. So anyway, I brought Dorian, when I spoke to Dorian on the phone, I sent Dorian a letter to the same post office box that his father had sent the reply to me. Dorian got back to me by phone a couple of days later and asked me a few questions just to make sure that I was serious about going out there and learning, because he was busy, and even though he was very generous with his time, he didn't want his time wasted, and I understood that. And so during the conversation, he asked me what my intent was, and I told him that I intended to be the highest paid illustrator in that business. His response to me was, you realize I work in this business, right? And I said, yes, I'm aware of that. So a little bit over the top for me. But anyway, I went out to his house, and a few days later, he was having a bunch of friends over to do photo shoots for paintings. So I got to meet his friends. But when I came in, I had my portfolio with me, and he went through it, and he was very kind. I didn't realize, up until that point, having lived in the Bronx all those years, I'd never actually been to a museum, which is terrible because we have some really great museums in New York. But just a lack of culture on my part. So when I walked into his house and I saw what original paintings looked like, I realized just how far off the mark I was. I didn't realize until I had gotten there. But once I walked in and I saw his originals and his father's, he had a couple of his dad's paintings there, I realized just how far away I was from what I wanted to do. And it was humbling, painful and humbling. But Dorian, very, very kind. He went through my portfolio, and he said that, there was some issues, but they were all manageable. And he didn't think I'd have any problems. So that was fine. We then went over to his studio. We did some photo shoots. And later that evening, we came back to his place. And all of these 21, 22-year-old artists were taking out their most current work. And everybody's work was amazing. Everybody looked professional to me. And, when I thought that it was just maybe a couple of guys who could produce work of that caliber, it didn't seem like I felt like even if I only hit 80% of that quality, I could still make a living at it. And I'd get better as time went by. But now I'm standing in a room with half a dozen 22-year-olds. They're all able to do it. And I'm thinking, I'm the only one in the entire world that can't do it. And so eventually everybody finishes pulling out their work, and then everyone in the room sort of turns and looks at me. And they are like, do you have anything here? And I'm like, trying to kick my portfolio under the couch so nobody can see it. So I take the work out, they look at it, and everyone's very kind. But to me, I didn't want to be patronized. I knew just how bad the work was. They all went out to dinner, and I went home to lick my wounds. On the drive home, I decided, I was done. There was no way I could do this. And I spent the next 2 days sort of wallowing in self-pity and trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. The third day I woke up with the idea that if they could do it, why couldn't I? And so I knuckled down. I went to work. I went out to Dorian's house. I began a self-portrait, which is what he photographed for me that first day when I was out. And this is when I overstayed my welcome. He's very friendly. He's very kind about it. But what happened is I came about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I worked. I worked through the day, and I was working in slow motion because I really didn't understand anything, but I was doing what he had shown me. And I left his house at about 1 o'clock at night. He actually went to sleep. He just told me, lock the door on your way out. I mean, you couldn't find a kinder, more generous person. He should have thrown me out hours ago at gunpoint. I was a total stranger, and here he actually went to sleep because he needed to go to sleep. But I was so engrossed in what I was doing, it didn't occur to me to exhibit manners. But anyway, so a year later, I was a working professional. I took all that stuff that I had figured out and that he had shown me, and I then just started applying it and stretching as much as I could. And again, back then there was no internet to research, to go and see people working, or there was just what you had in your studio. You could go and read books, but the books just don't do it. And so it took me about a year to flesh out a body of work strong enough and get myself in with one of the major publishing companies in New York and pull down my first book cover. By the time I delivered it, I had maybe 3 or 4 more pieces lined up. And by the time I had those delivered, I was booked about 6 months out. And I was a commercial illustrator for about 8 years. I have about 250 published works under my name, mostly book covers, but I've done work for National Geographic. I've done work with Lucasfilms, with Star Wars and Jurassic Park, R.J. Reynolds. And the real claim to fame in my resume is the Bridges to Babylon CD cover for the Rolling Stones. I was privileged enough to work on that back in 1997 for that tour and CD. So after 250 published works, that's the one that sort of makes me famous. So, and for me, by the time I'd gotten there, I was starting to get worn out doing illustration. There was very little flexibility for creativity. And I went from doing book covers, which didn't pay a lot, but they were enjoyable, to sort of mainstream commercial work, which paid an enormous amount, but were terrible to work on. And I just got exhausted with the whole thing. And at about 30 years old, I stepped out of that industry entirely, and I took off 2 years where I didn't work. I just took it easy. Eventually, I got involved with a publishing company, and I ran the art department for that publishing company for about 7 years. And in that time, I began doing portrait work as well. The publishing company, we published about 140 titles or so in that time, including Game of Thrones, limited edition Game of Thrones. So, I got to work on some really fun projects there. And again, not a strong suit. I'm not a graphic designer, and arguably the work that I did was horrific. But because I had connections, I was the one running the art department getting to do that work, which is a valuable lesson for anybody trying to build a career in art. You will be beat out every time by people who have connections, no matter how good you are. There's a reality in that. So it's not just about making art, but it's about socializing, knowing how to do that. So, but anyway, I eventually, like I said, I overlapped and I was doing portrait work, and I've been doing portrait work ever since, about 15 years now. And I've got about 200 delivered portraits as well, and all walks of life, private commissions, institutional. About a year and a half ago, I did a portrait for the Pentagon for the Judge Advocate General of the Navy. I've done a few actors and actresses. But anyway, and now, so about 8 years ago, I was looking at expanding a little bit, getting into some new things, always looking for fresh avenues to keep things interesting. And I decided to open up a school. Originally, it was going to be a school that ran just a couple of classes for what we think of as gifted students. And that gifted just means they work harder and they work more hours. But the school just sort of took on a life of its own. And right now, the flagship school, which is in Hillsborough, New Jersey, has about 150 students. And I have a second school in about 10 miles away from here, which I opened last year, and we're in the process of building out what will become a national franchise. Now that we have the program gelled and we see that it can be transmitted by anybody who's been through the program. So we're trying to expand on this to make this education available to anybody looking to have it. And so that brings me to where I am today.
All right, and just letting all that soak in. There's so many different avenues that we could go with this interview, but I'm going to be a little bit self-serving here, and but I feel like it's on the behalf of the listeners as well, because I'm really curious about. Well, first of all, I just want to tell the listeners a little bit more about your school, because I was looking into it. The work that the students produce is amazing. And I didn't realize there's a few more things that I'm sure Kevin will get into why it's so amazing, like how quickly the students are able to start getting results. But here's a statistic, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, because I don't have it up right now. But the students, like the high school students that go through your school, on average, get around $80,000 in scholarship money to then go on to university or college or whatever their next step is after high school.
Yes.
And that the placement is like 100%. And I was just blown away by this, because your school is very affordable, and it might be one of the highest return on investments, especially in education, which is usually, I guess you can argue that you need your education before you can get your career. But it's one of the best investments that you could ever make in terms of somebody who wants to learn art and have this as a career, because instead of going to college and graduating with $100,000 in student debt, you could very well graduate with no debt.
Yes. And actually, I have my program, even with the little kids starting at 6 and 7 years old, I train everybody as though they're looking at it for a career. Though the vast majority of students that come here are doing it just to develop their skills for themselves, I treat everybody like they are a career track. And I have programs, everything from a very basic 1-hour class all the way up to a full-time program. It's a 1-year or 10-month program that's 35 hours a week. And I'll take a student from the ground all the way to a career in 1 year. And it's a pressure cooker. And people that come in and do it, they work very hard. And that education is only $10,000. That's less than the dorms would cost in any one of these schools for a year. And so when you're making art for a living, nobody ever asks you for a degree. They just want to see if you have skills. Can you deliver product? And if you can do that, where you went to school, or if you went to school at all, is irrelevant. And so I do have students that come here. I actually have a good number of high school students that make money at their art rather than working menial jobs like their friends do. They're selling paintings, developing their skills on other people's money. And I encourage them to do that. And, we only talk about, in the more intensive programs, we don't only talk about how we make art. We talk about how you build a network, how you socialize to entrench yourself in a place that will generate work for you, how to build a business. Because if you don't have business acumen, it doesn't matter how well you paint. And I know I have a lot of friends in the industry, and there are some of them who, they can run circles around me with a brush, but I out-earn them without even trying. And what it is that I know how to cultivate clients. I understand how that's done. I'm very creative in it. And where these people are spending their time developing their painting and their drawing skills further and further, they sit in their studios talking to themselves all day long. And when it comes time to actually speak to somebody, to try to encourage them to buy in to a piece of art, they don't know how to do it. And so the education is broader than just what to do with a brush. Think about it. When you paint, in its simplest form, what is painting? Painting is pushing around colored mud with a hairy stick with an intent to create something, an illusion, that looks or doesn't look like something in the real world. When you break it down like that, it's not that complicated. How you get somebody to take money out of their bank account and give it to you in exchange for it is the hard part. And if you look around at the successful art that's out there in the contemporary world, you start to get a sense of the fact that it's not the work, it's the salesmanship. It's how it's marketed. And that's not to say forego getting an education. The better your work is, the more you know about creating art, the easier it is to sell the product. You have to work a lot harder to sell a 10-year-old Hyundai it's much harder to sell that 10-year-old Hyundai than it is to sell a brand new BMW. And so if you have limited skills, and that's not to be to downplay the value of a Hyundai or any other car, but you understand the marketing behind one car and the other and how one car would be perceived compared to the other. If you have serious skills, it's easier to sell your product. It's easier to believe in what you sell, because believing in it is key.
I think that's one of the things, just in talking with you, why your students have such a high degree of success. And I mean, I know success is very subjective, but they're able to advance their skills very quickly. I think we can say that subjectively, or objectively rather. And it's your ability to break things down into very simple pieces and then give the students that breakdown, which is the tools, where instead of saying, now we're going to go into all these like layers of figure drawing and just sit somebody in a class and put a nude model in front of them, which is how the school that I went to approached it. You have a completely different approach. Could you tell us a little bit about how you approach that, especially for drawing? Because I think a lot of people, it would really open their eyes to what they're watching on YouTube, their assumptions on how they think art should be learned or how it should be taught, and really challenge those beliefs so that they could come at it in another way. And with those fresh set of eyes, try it. Try it for a week, try it for a month, doing it your way, and see what your results are, and prove it to yourself which way is better. Because to me, it makes a whole lot of sense.
Right. Well, it's actually, you talk about like coming into an art class and sitting in front of a live model, and the teachers, I love this one, draw what you see.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's a strength in being able to do that, but the first thing is understanding what you see. Understanding that when you look at that figure, that you don't see the figure. You see a stream of information, light bouncing off of that figure. Your eyes taking that it's almost like digital information, and then your brain, from whole cloth, creates an image. And so if you understand that, you can then start processing the information differently. An absence of light is different than a presence of light. And so what we do here is we break down the moving parts of a drawing or painting to simplify them. And I'll start with that process. So a drawing, and we spoke about this earlier, a drawing in grayscale is comprised of only two moving parts. And if you can master those two moving parts, you apply them to every single thing that you do. You have mastery over these two things, and you then use them to draw everything that's in front of you. Where if you sit in front of a model and you draw the model, the next model that comes in is different. You're now a novice again, drawing something completely new. And then if I put a plant in front of you, you're a novice again, because you're creating a technique for each and everything that's in front of you. However, if I give you a language a very, very simple language with which to, that you can master, and then apply it to everything, it doesn't matter what the subject is. You have mastery, a sphere of influence over a very small number of tools, and those tools have broad application because you understand how to use them. So in the Art Academy, all marks with a pencil are straight. We never make a curved mark. Every mark is a straight mark. Because if you make straight marks, they're always the same. It takes moments to master. Not to become proficient, but to gain mastery. So a drawing is comprised of shades of gray, or values. We have a language for creating those shades of gray. And it's a very simple thing. And then we have the other moving part, which is edges. You have sharp edges and you have gradients. Now, each one of these things has their place. If you think about a value scale, 1 being white and 10 being black, you can figure 1 to 5 are going to be your lights and 6 to 10 will be your shadows. You never have a shadow that's within 1 to 5 value range, and you never have a light that's within 6 to 10. That way, when somebody looks at your drawing, there's no confusion as to what is a light and what is a shadow. It's a very simple thing. One of the big things when you look at an untrained artist who's been drawing is that they don't have a range of values. You have values that are in shadows that are equal to or even lighter than values that are in light, when by definition, a shadow is an absence of light. It cannot be lighter than an area that is in direct light. It defies the definition. So we start by creating these sort of boundaries for how we're going to think about what's in the light and what's in the shadow, and we divide everything that way. So things that are in the light are lighter on the value scale, things that are in the shadows are darker, and we have a dividing line and they never cross over. And I hope that makes sense. Then we have edges. So we've already addressed one of the two moving parts. Then we have edges. The edges are around the outer contours of each object and at the places where lights and shadows meet. So all of the outer contours are sharp, and because they define the edges of things. And then we have two different types of shadows, and we determine the type of edge that they have based on the type of shadow. A cast shadow is going to have sharp edges. And a form shadow, an object that goes around a shape, is going to be graded. And if you can apply those two ideas, everything that you draw will have a sense of light, a directional light, and a sense of mass. And they'll be crystal clear for people to visually read. And that's key. So, but again, it's a little bit hard to do it, to explain it merely in words because it's a visual medium. But a drawing is broken down in two parts, values and edges. There's nothing else, and it doesn't matter if you're drawing a ball or a family of 10 from direct observation. Those two moving parts, and if you understand how to use them, understand what they do, you can draw anything and bring it to life and give it an impression of mass and depth. And so here at the Academy, we start with just those two simple things. And then we allow the students to investigate how to apply them to different things. And you've seen on the website what that progress looks like. It's very quick. Students are able to replicate a photograph generally within 4 weeks of coming in. We're talking about a total of 10 hours. They're already replicating photographs. And I'm talking about spot on, perfect copies. And we use that. We use photographs because they're the quickest way into the process. And these, even though they look photographic and they are hand drawn, this is it's an exercise for developing quality control. It's not true drawing. It's a quality control exercise where we flesh out the skill set. Once the students get through that, we then teach them how to draw from life utilizing the same thought process. That thought process is identical to the painting process in grayscale, and then we move over and we add color. So we go from those two moving parts in drawing to three moving parts in color painting. Three moving parts are value, edges, and then color. And of course, we can say values and edges and simplify them that way. Experience is where nuance creeps into a drawing. But in its most fundamental approach, if you have a general grasp of value and a general grasp of those two types of edges, you can create stunning drawings. Subtlety comes later on, but those two moving parts for a drawing and then just the addition of color later on when you start painting in color. And it's pretty much what we teach in here. And of course, there's a lot more to it as you get experience under your belt, but those are the basics. And if you can keep them that simple and master those simple little ideas, the entire world of art opens up to you.
Kevin, I have a question. The results that your students get are completely amazing, and I encourage people to go to Kevin's site, theartacademy.us. But do you feel, in your experience as an educator, that if somebody wants to do a different form of artwork than realistic, representational, spot-on work, and let's say they want to go into comic books, is this still the place where they should absolutely start, because you're building on your foundational skills of observation and training yourself to mastery? And from that point, really nothing is that challenging. It's just applying those same fundamentals over to a new style and spending the time to build up the muscle memory for that style.
Yes, I would say foundations are foundations. And it doesn't matter. I can tell you, I have students that have come in here and I've trained them how to draw and paint. And as a senior in high school, they're looking to go to college for digital art. They'll actually bring a laptop and a tablet in here and apply what they've been taught in a traditional medium to a digital format, and they get extraordinary results. I mean, we're talking about painting on a computer using traditional approach and thought process. And the stuff is amazing. And I can't teach them the digital format. All I can teach them is how to think about what they see. But they're able to take it and move it over on their own. And it applies to everything. It really does apply to everything. These foundations they're empowering. And again, even if somebody, going back to the initial point, the way that we draw and paint isn't, even though we use realism is not what's being taught here. We actually teach abstractionism. So this education allows a student to produce full-blown abstract art or hyper-realism or anything in between. And the reason that the way that we break it down and why it's abstract painting and drawing is, so when we look at an object, if I put a pear up on the table and I have a light that gives me about half the pear in the light and half the pear in the shadows, we don't draw the pear. We basically break down the shape of the shadow, which is an abstract. It's easier to see the abstract shape because it doesn't have any preconceived connotations to it. We have a bias when we look at a pear or an apple or anything else that we recognize. But if you view just the shape of the shadow, it's an abstract. We draw the abstract. It's almost like a puzzle piece. We then, when we finish with the shadow, we then move over and draw the shape of the light, never viewing the pear as a pear. The shape of the light is an abstract as well, and if we've got the two shapes correct, they click together like two pieces of a puzzle. But at no point did we ever draw a pear. And we do that when we draw a face. We never draw an eye. We never draw a nose. We draw shapes, and we select values, and we select the type of edges between those shapes and values. And if we get them right, each one of those abstract shapes clicks together to become a realistic drawing or painting. And so I heard an artist say one time, he was being interviewed about painting portraits. He was a preeminent portrait painter in the world. And so they asked him, what he found the most difficult part of painting portraits. And he said, painting portraits. He said he doesn't paint portraits. What he does is paint shapes and values and colors. And if he gets them all right, a portrait emerges from it. But at no point does he paint a nose or an eye. And it's a very important perspective to have. Painting an eye, no matter how well you paint, you can never paint an eye. All you can do is create the illusion of an eye. And it's a dangerous thing to think in terms of making an eye when you're trying to paint one. Let it be values and edges, and if you're working in color, colors, but nothing else. Keep it simple. Again, if you paint an eye, every single eye is a new eye. You're a novice when you sit down to paint it. But if when you are trying to paint an eye, you are painting values and edges and colors, you have mastery over those three moving parts. 100 eyes is the same as painting one eye or a ball. The simplest thing and the most complex thing are made up of the same components. Master the components, you can apply them to everything. And so again, thinking abstractly and finding the little pieces, the components in abstract form, putting them all together makes a realistic image if that's your intent. But you can start at abstract and stay abstract, or move anywhere through the scale from abstract through impression all the way to hyperrealism. Now, as far as the education is concerned, I put a ball up on the table for a student to draw, and I need them to draw or paint that ball the way they see it, because that's the only way for me as a teacher to know if they are grasping the concepts. to perfectly render what they see. Again, if you can perfectly render what you see, you can perfectly render from your imagination just as well as you could off of the table. And once you can do that, you can have a subject and decide you don't like the color of something, but you know what color you want it to be, and change it and make it exactly what you intend. It's not accidental. And we as an artist, removing accidents, being in complete control of the process the entire time is key to getting what we intend. Because making art is about intent. At least to me it is.
I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours, but I have one final question that I think really ties all of this together and gives people an amazing framework that they can take for themselves, which is you do something differently, I think, for with your students in terms of when they're finished their work or when they're ready to present their work to you.
Yes.
And could you talk just a little bit about that? Because I feel like it's an extremely empowering idea for everyone to take on, where you see people posting their stuff online and asking for these critiques, but if they approach it the same way as you, there's no way they would post it online until they've hit that point.
Sure. Well, I mean, any place you go to school for art, the first thing they do, at the end of the first day, you finish your drawing, it goes up on the wall, and all the other people in the room who don't know anything about art critique it for you. They tell you what they think. And even the teachers will sometimes do that. When you get to college, the teachers jump in and they critique your work. In here, and I find that to be a very bad thing, and I'll explain why. In the Art Academy, I never critique a piece of work in that way. What I do is I express to the students that I expect a 100% effort. Everything is to be done to the best of their ability. We tend to be very impatient. We can be unfocused. But in the time and space that they're in this school working, I ask them to be patient with themselves, to not worry about how long it takes to get a piece of work done, but to do it to the best of their ability. Yeah. So at the Art Academy, students will often come up to me and ask me, these are beginning students who have been around for a while know better. But they'll ask me, or they'll say to me that they think they're done. Could I come over and take a look? And I'll always tell them to come over and get me when they know they're finished. They'll then ask me, how will they know when they're done? My answer is always the same. When you're working, if you still see things in your drawing or your painting that are not what you intended them to be, and you have to be honest with yourself about this. If it doesn't look the way you intended it, if it doesn't match the thing you're trying to match, and you can see what is wrong, it is your job to fix it. You keep working on your drawing or your painting until it meets that criteria. Now, if you find things that are in error and you're not sure what to do with them, you try to figure out based on the skill set that you have. And what we do is we go through one moving part at a time. Are the values correct? Yes? Okay. Are the colors correct? Yes? Okay. Are the edges correct? We go through those three moving parts to figure out where the problem might be. If we can resolve what the problem is, then it's a question of, does the student know how to fix it now that they've figured out where the problem is? If they can figure out how to fix it, they then go in and fix it. If they cannot figure out how to fix it, the drawing is finished. Because again, it's outside of their skill set. Those skills will develop. In the next drawing, they'll very likely, if they come across that problem, by that time they'll have figured out how to get over that hurdle. There'll be other things that they won't know, but again, much like with learning how to see, I can't explain to a student after 25 years of doing this professionally, a student is not going to see their drawing the way that I do. And so when a student asks me what I think of their drawing, it doesn't matter what I think, because I'm going to be able to see things that they can't. And they can't fix things that they can't see. So it's always contingent on them taking the time to look over their drawing and be honest with themselves about whether or not it's cleared the hurdle of being what they intended. If it clears that hurdle, it's finished. If it doesn't clear that hurdle, it's then their job to figure out where the problems are. When they find the problems, if they don't know what to do to fix them, they can't figure it out, they don't do anything because they're just as likely to do damage as they are to do good. So we don't just jump in and hope for the best. If they're able to figure out what to do to improve the piece, they then jump in and do that, and then the questions start again. Now is the drawing done? And so on and so on. But I ask students to be honest with themselves, to not ask for a critique, but to tell me when they are certain that they have reached the limit of their ability. And that does a couple of things. One thing, it puts responsibility in their hands. They're not leaning on me to let them know what to do next. It puts the responsibility in their hands. I tell students when they come in here, I don't take credit for their work. They're the ones that do the work. They get 100% credit for it. I also don't take credit for their failures. That's theirs as well. I do everything I can to ensure that students don't trip too often, and if they trip, I show them how to get up. But the idea is let them be self-sufficient. And it's an empowering thing. When a student would normally stop at 70% quality on a drawing and then come over and ask for help, when they know that they're going to just be sent back to their easel to work, they'll, instead of getting up at 70%, they'll push it to 90%, where they hit a wall. Then when I come over, now I can see through their eyes what they are able to see and what they understand and don't understand, what they've grasped and what they haven't grasped, what they've been able to solve for themselves. But because they have reached the limit of their ability, I'm now looking through their eyes. I can see where the problems are, and that makes it easier for me to educate them. If they stop at 70%, I have to assume that that's the limit of what they're capable of. And now I'm teaching them things maybe some things that would get them to 90% that they already know. They've just not applied them. And so I ask them to raise the bar as high as they possibly can before coming in looking for other people's thoughts. And remember, when you're asking other people what they think, bear in mind who's offering you a critique. Not all critiques are equal. And critiques about liking this thing or liking that thing are not the same as a critique about value structure and an explanation, crystal clear explanation of why the value structure is an issue or compositional issues. Most people, I think, they go out and they'll ask for critique because they're happy with what they've done and they want some positive feedback to sort of bolster their own feelings. But critiques are really designed for somebody who has greater experience and understanding to be able to help you build on the skill set that you have. And that's really where you want to go when you ask for help or thoughts on your work, but always push it to the furthest extent of your ability before you do that so that the insights being offered are of value to you.
All right. Well, my mind has been blown here. So I really appreciate you taking the time to explain all of this because it's given me a new light to look at everything personally, and I hope for the listeners as well. If somebody's interested in your school, can they apply at any time, or do you have set times of the year? Because I feel like somebody listening to this is going to they're going to want more information, and maybe we can just prime them a little bit to know when you take in new students.
We take students every day. Even though we have about 25 students in the school at any given time, every single student that comes into the school is trained individually at their own pace, starting on the day they walk in. So there is no global teaching in here. I don't teach classrooms. I teach every single student individually. These are private lessons. And so students can literally walk in any day of the week that we have class.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kevin. Kevin's website is at theartacademy.us. And any last thoughts before we wrap up here? This has been fantastic.
Well, I would say a lot of people, when they go out to the website or when they come into the school, what we run into is students see what is being done here and they assume that it's, well, I have people that have been in here that have referred to the school as the Charles Xavier School for the Gifted Artists. And the truth of the matter is that it really does look that way when you walk in. You'll see 10-year-old kids producing, arguably professional level work. And so it's easy to be intimidated and to think that this is not a place for you unless you're already an amazing artist. But everybody that comes in here, and if you go out onto the website and you look at the gallery, the before and after images, we have students that are there that they came in here producing stick figures. And 2 years later, they're producing museum-grade work. And they're on career tracks. This education is for anybody. I mean, literally anybody who would love to be able to do it. It's not something for somebody who's special or gifted, or I don't believe in gifted artists. I believe in a sound education and being serious about the work when you do it. And I think if you apply those two things, there's not a single person on the planet that couldn't get the results you see on the website within 2 years to be able to paint like a professional. And even that, I say 2 years, it doesn't even take that long.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. And if you're interested, definitely go check it out. Your mind is going to be literally blown. Even if you're not sure if you should go back to school or not, but you might know somebody, please refer them to Kevin's school, because I feel like I usually don't endorse schools because of the high cost and low results that people are getting. But the school is different. Go check it out.
Yeah, I'll tell you, we actually, just to sort of frame how the school has been viewed by sort of outsiders, there's a paint company in Milan, Italy called Mentorship. They've been around for about 65 years. You can imagine in Milan, this is one of the art meccas of the world over in Italy. And the founder of the paint company was a world-renowned painter back before World War II. And he was a chemist as well. He created this brand of paint. His son took over the business, and now his grandson, Gianni Memiri, runs the company. And I would recommend to anybody looking for really great, I wouldn't say it's student-grade paint, but I would recommend to anybody to go out and get his paint. Very inexpensive, and the quality is extraordinary. Painting supplies are so expensive these days, but I would definitely recommend Classical Paint. They're phenomenal. But anyway, Gianni Memiri he was here in the U.S., and we use his material. He came and he wanted to see what we were doing. He'd been told about us. He came in, walked around the school, had a bunch of questions about the age of the students producing these paintings, and the fact that these paintings were being produced with his entry-level paint. So later that night, he came in and he gave a lecture. We had maybe about 70 people here. And he gave a lecture. And in the middle of the lecture, he stopped. And I have to sort of paraphrase. His quote is actually up on the website. But basically, he said, since he was 4 years old, he'd been traveling all around the world with his father. And, from about 30 years old up until maybe about 54 when he was here, he was the face of the company, been running the company, travels all over the world. Russia, China, and he's an invited guest to all these amazing art schools. And he said that in all of those years of traveling and going to these art schools, that this was one of the strongest programs he had ever seen. I mean, it was a really, you can imagine how proud I was to have somebody in a position like that make such a statement. And he couldn't believe how the results that we're getting with such a young audience. And, look, I opened this school. I grew up very poor, and art, the life that I've had, and it's been a really wonderful life, has been made possible because of art. And for me to be able to share this and open up that world to other people is in my mind, it's a calling, and it's a responsibility, and it would be negligence for me to not share what I have learned and what I've figured out. And really, that's what this school is about. This program is about making art accessible. And I'm not talking about playful stuff. I'm talking about serious art available to anybody with the desire to be able to make it. The program is built for that purpose.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. And I can't say enough. Go check out the website, theartacademy.us, and see what people are doing. It's amazing.
Thank you so much.
It demands patience, skill, years of practice.
You talk like a fool. I would trade a century of practice for an ounce of inspiration.